There you go.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. I'm Taylor. I'm an anthropology major with minors in archaeology and history. And my project is on the K-pop fan community and identity. So for this project, my main research question is how does identity affect fans' interactions and experiences within the K-pop fan community? And in terms of identity, I focused on 6 different aspects: race, nationality, language, gender, sexuality, and age, which influence a lot of different aspects of how we live our everyday lives. So I want to start with the justification for my research first. There have been some studies done already on fan communities and K-pop fan communities, but they've been really limited on either a specific demographic. Like one of the studies I looked at focused on Latin American fans, and the other studies also did a smaller range of surveys, only like 20 to 30 in-depth surveys. And also, the study provides a broader perspective since it has a much wider focus compared to like the specific demographic group and the small amount of responses. And it also ties into current global discussions about Black Lives Matters, cultural appropriation, racism, and things like that. So for my theoretical background, I focus on a polarized scapes theory for analyzing globalization. And he uses these scapes as a lens, and he has 5 different ones: ethnoscapes, which are usually refers to moving people in groups such as immigrants; technoscapes, which is technology and the spread of it in the modern world and how fast things spread through technology; financescapes, which is living in a capital, and he's developed this a little bit since he originally published the article. He's associated with risk and debt and how people are the risk takers for the banks and other financial institutions. And there are mediascapes, which is how images and ideas spread electronically; and ideascapes, which promote certain ideologies such as nationalist ideals through images. And he also uses the idea of imagined worlds, which constitutes an imagined space with a shared ideal. In his work, he uses the example of Quebec and the people living there having a different culture despite living in Canada. And these imagined worlds aren't always tied to a physical location, but like I said, are bound by certain ideals. And then I want to also get into a brief history of K-pop. There's a lot more, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to give just a little bit. So it's credited with starting with the group Sateji and the Boys, which is in around 1992. They appeared on TV and they incorporated rap, hip hop, other foreign music styles. This started around whenever Korea became a more democratic nation, and it appealed to the new generation, which at the time had been raised in a society that wasn't dealing with wars such as World War II, Korean War. They were all born after that. And they also grew up with more American pop culture, TV shows, restaurants, and music from the West coming in to South Korea. Then in 1993, Lee Seung-man founded SM Entertainment, which is one of the big 3 entertainment companies in K-pop. And he sort of came up with a trainee system, which usually scouts idols or holds auditions to get trainees who will eventually, if they make it through, become idols and debut in groups. But it's a very structured process to getting that far. It eventually became more global with the introduction of idols who are not Korean or Korean immigrants, which includes idols from China, Japan, America, but not ethnically Korean, Thailand, and other places, and has continued to grow as they recruited idols and expanded into other language markets. So for my main data collection, I did a structured survey. This is a picture of the flyer I had around campus and on social media. I had 18 different questions that focused on the demographics, how people participate in fandom, if they face discrimination, and politics. And I had the survey open for about 2 weeks, and I promoted it on my social media channels as well as posting on around the campus here. And I also reached out to different people to get them to promote it as well, which helped me gain a lot of responses for my survey, just being able to spread it and using a sort of snowball sampling size. And so from that, I had a total of 1,007 responses. I did have to delete some of them though, because a couple did apply on. I had a question that asked, "How long have you been a fan of K-pop?" And they replied, I'm not. And this is about the K-pop fan community. And so I ended up deleting those responses just because they aren't relevant if they're not even a part of the K-pop fan community. And I had answers from really all over the world, but all the questions were optional, so not every question got a response from every single person. So while I did have 1,007 responses, not every question had 1,007 responses. So I've included a few pictures of the demographics just to show the breakdown. So for age, it was mostly people under the age of 24, but there are older people who do enjoy K-pop. Some people did mention that they got into it because their child is, and things like that. So it's not, it's seen more as a young people sort of phenomenon with social media and all of that, but this shows that it's not just young people who are interested in it. And I also included continent because that's what I use to get an idea of location. In majority Western North America, but I did have answers from every continent. And that was, I thought that was interesting just to see how different people view it and how they've experienced it and what people around them also think about it. And I also asked about gender, which was largely female, but people of multiple different genders applied. I also included other options for this and for sexuality because I only knew so much and people felt that they weren't represented by the options I gave them. They could describe it to me themselves. And then for sexuality, which surprisingly was the most varied, because 44% of people identify as straight. So that was what was most identified, but not majority of people identified with one specific sexuality, which I thought was really interesting. I didn't think that would be the most varied out of everything. And then the last demographic I decided to focus on was languages. So I had a question about that. It was a fill in the blank though, because I don't know every language out there that exists. So I thought we'd go for real just to list them off. And 25% of people only spoke English, and everyone else spoke at least two or more languages. I also did ask a question about race, but that allowed people to choose multiple options, so I thought that would be very hard to put down into a pie chart just because there are so many responses and people were allowed to pick multiple. I also had other options than that. So I felt that was a lot more challenging to break down because it doesn't account for people's multiple identities in a pie chart. So for my responses, I picked out 4 different major themes, which are globalization, different types of identity, consumption, and activism. So for globalization, one of the major things people mentioned was being able to connect with people who didn't have the same identity of them, because as you can see through the demographics, there's so many different people who enjoy K-pop. So it's not super hard to come across someone who likes but isn't exactly the same as you. One person wrote, by being exposed to another culture, you're in a way made to stop and listen to what is considered respectful and proper etiquette within that culture. You're able to see how one culture goes about their life, and you have the option to respect it whether or not you disagree. But tolerance and respect can be translated across anywhere, which I thought was a good summary of how people interact with each other. Not always in the K-pop fandom, because there are fights, but it does make you much more aware of different cultures and ideas that are out there. Also, in some instances, help people connect back to their own culture, such as with Korean immigrants, which connects back to the ethnoscapes idea I mentioned earlier. A couple people mentioned that in their responses, saying, the music was refreshing and new and helped me connect to my Korean culture more. And someone also mentioned it made them interested, they were interested in their heritage and that they were adopted. So they may not have gotten much connection to their original culture because they were adopted, but this could serve as a way to connect with it better. And for the identity, I've broken it up into 2 different slides because there are some really interesting quotes about it. So I wanted to first focus on personal identity, which focuses more on the demographics. And in a way, it acts as a double-edged sword because people mentioned the sexual, like identities such as sexuality being seen in a positive light in some instances, but other instances being discriminated against because of it. But the quote I included here says, I've seen a fandom where it's getting out of hand and arguments that started out as my group is better than yours turned turn into I'm a better fan because I'm Asian, white, black, etc. Or you're not a real fan because you're not into ethnic group. And I often see posts that go along the lines of girls that only like boy groups are just as awful as rapists. Or if you don't like girl groups, you're a hateful scumbag. And strangely, at least to me, it's strange. There are quite a few people who discriminate themselves because of their heritage. I saw people arguing that their idol will never love them because they have a certain skin color or sexuality. So there is a lot of discourse I feel in the K-pop fandom about your identity and how you present yourself. So it's kind of a tricky path, I think, because in some cases you can't express your identity. Other cases you might want to hide certain parts of your identity just so you don't get that discrimination because of who you are. And so I have social identity, which wasn't mentioned as much in the survey, but I did read about it in one of the studies I looked at. So it allows fans to imagine an identity of self outside of what is expected in their culture. This was a study that was on Latin America fans that discussed this. And so just because they are expected to act a certain way in real life, online they can imagine a different kind of identity or person. They can express themselves in one way online, but a completely different way in person. However, it can create like tension with the expectations. Sorry. But some people in that study mentioned that they face discrimination from their friends and family for saying that they like K-pop because it's from a different culture. So like, why do you like that? It's not what you should be liking. What's also interesting that I didn't usually think of whenever I started with this topic, but people mentioned the identity of the artist being important and racism occurring because like, oh, I like K-pop, and then people acting racist towards the artists and things like that. Like one fan said, it's made me understand the depth of casual racism and how normalized culture discrimination is. It also made me realize how institutions and events have obstructed the achievements of people of color artists, not just Korean artists, any non-Americans or non-English speaking artists, and the mostly unconscious biases that people have against different languages and cultures. So again, it's just like there's a lot of discrimination from friends, family, even the media too. I've seen online before where like media will like make fun of artist names, purposely spell them wrong, and things like that. And so next I have consumption. Of course there is product consumption, which includes albums, merchandise, things like that. But this also ties back to identity because the access people have to consume these products comes from the money they have, which can be based on their identity and how that is reflected in the job market and things like that. And honestly, these things are not cheap. I did bring one of my K-pop albums. It's not just a regular like CD you get in the store. It's like it can be big things like this. And this was actually I got it at Walmart. It's $22.99 for this, but it can be expensive too because this is a bulkier one, so shipping can be really, really expensive. Katie knows. But yeah, so there's a lot of accessibility too that's affected by your identity. But people, like this person said, I want to support the idol groups I enjoy. And it's entertainment that I enjoy. Purchasing their CDs and merchandise. They're like resellers in Canada. Allows me to feel like I'm supporting them despite not being able to go to their shows or vote for them on the music shows. So in a way, even though we live so far away from Korea, we're still able to show support for idols through the purchasing of merchandise and CDs because there are these music shows and streaming and CDs do count for a part of like whether or not they win on a music show. So it acts as a way to show support. And then there's also knowledge consumption, which I read in a different study about how a fan's knowledge acts as capital and kind of creates a social hierarchy. So the more knowledge you have, the higher in a way you are in the social hierarchy. So people who have been fans longer, who know more, will be at the top, whereas if you just joined, you're kind of a nobody in the fandom. And then there's also lifestyle consumption, which is something another study brought up because there are a lot of live streams that idols will do. There's a specific app called VLive, which is for K-pop idols who live stream on. And they started to utilize Instagram's live option more recently, but it gives idols a way to connect with fans showing their everyday lives. But it may not exactly be their everyday lives. A lot of times the managers will be in the background making sure they don't say anything they're not supposed to and things like that, but fans see that as their everyday lives and kind of give them a way to connect with the idols, even though they're not really connecting. And also there is cultural consumption. There's some people who mentioned in the survey they traveled to Korea because of K-pop. There's also consuming of different aspects of Korean culture too. Language, Korean dramas can be really popular because certain idols will appear in a specific drama and fans will watch that and then learn more about Korean culture through these TV shows or reality shows or become interested in other things because, oh, their favorite group or idol appeared on this or was like sponsored by this. So that just kind of introduces people more into the Korean culture as they get more into a specific idol group or K-pop in general. And then the last part I have is activism. So there's political activism. I don't know if you guys heard about the Trump rally over the summer in Oklahoma, where K-pop fans and TikTok people joined together and kind of promoted that you can reserve tickets online, but you don't actually have to go, which would throw off the numbers for these rallies and create a long mailing list, but that doesn't mean people are going to vote for Trump and things like that. So one person said, it's allowed me to broaden my perspective, talking to so many people in their own troubles, such as Black Lives Matter, the issues with the LGBTQ community, and more. It makes me want to actively help fight these social injustices. And I think social media has been a big platform for that too, especially Twitter. Like, they will get things trending and bring awareness to certain aspects, like I said, the Trump rallies. And then there's also charitable activism. There have been instances of BTS donated $1 million to Black Lives Matter movement, and their fans raised $1 million as well to match that and also donate that. There's also instances of raising money for charity. But I included a picture of what this started out as a meme. It's called Big Titty Gang. But originally started out as a joke by this one idol, BM, from the group Card. But eventually, a fan had approached him at an event pre-COVID, talked about how much it meant to her because she was a breast cancer survivor. So he started a clothing line, and this is from a screenshot from the clothing line's Instagram page from this past October. And they donated over $15,000 to breast cancer awareness because of the fans buying these shirts. So it isn't just fun little thing. K-pop has a lot more meaning than just the music. So for my final conclusions, identity is really complex. I mean, I didn't expect to get a straightforward answer whenever I asked this question, but it's very complex. I've learned about how many different layers there are to identity and how it's constantly being negotiated based on who you're with, where you are, what you're talking about, things like that. And it does play a major role in how fans experience fandom, because it can influence who they talk to, what groups they like, what kind of activities they participate in, if they can participate in different activities. And that is a picture of me at a cafe event for a K-pop idol in New York City. I thought I'd include that. Yeah, and then this is my bibliography for slideshow. And any questions?
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Questions? Taylor.
I have one if I could speak from the ceiling to you, Taylor.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. My question is this. I found the use of a Potter eye really interesting. It seemed initially that would make perfect sense, but then when you started sharing some of your survey results, I think those results actually complicate this a little bit. So I don't know how you felt about that, whether a Potter eye felt like it was still like a tight match to what you were seeing. For me, this was the tension. On the one hand, K-pop allows non-traditional identity expressions, and you have a variety of gender identities, sexual orientations. On the other hand, it allows people to connect to traditions. So it sort of begs the question, is K-pop a space for reconnecting to tradition, or is it a space where um, a sort of absence of tradition allows for identity expression? For a Potter, it'd be like a religion, right? Would be like one of his scapes. So it would be like if you were a part of a church, then you would join that church, and it would allow you freedom from wherever your sort of local culture is and connect to the church. But within the church, it's a strict. Um, anyway, what did you think about that? How does that tension resolve for you?
Well, as you like to say in class, it depends.
Yeah.
Because it honestly does depend on the fan and I guess why they participate in K-pop fandom, because that was one of my questions.
Okay.
But I didn't plan originally on using all aspects of his scapes theory, more fitting it to how it applied within the actual paper, if that makes sense. But I think the Imagine World is a major part of how some fans do participate and enjoy K-pop, if that makes sense.
Oh, that does make sense. I still think there's something to mine there with the difference between K-pop as a space that allows for a wide range of expressions and K-pop as a space with like constrained, clear rules that allow people to feel safe with following those rules. Um, it's a fascinating way that that's happening because it's doing both, right?
And maybe to sort of pick up on what Dr. Evans is saying, there's another component to your study that's looking at sort of the corporate production, right? The corporate side of K-pop and the production of K-pop. And so that's part of that tension as well, and sort of the how this environment or how this space is being created, right? And so that might be something that you sort of need to add to consider that element to be able to fully address that.
Yeah, I did have someone, I was thinking about this when I was thinking of things to include for my title, but on the question of why you like K-pop, someone who I felt for their marketing.
Yeah, because I mean, that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Other
I know you had talked about it like towards the beginning of the semester, but did you end up doing any like more personal interviews? Because I know you did.
I did not, just because of how many interviews I had with this. If I had more time, maybe, but I didn't have more time, so I did not.
questions? Okay, thanks.